orchids are liars. To the amateur eye, they appear fragile, temperamental things that demand constant coddling. But that is a deception. An orchid is a predator. It waits. It clings to the bark of stronger trees, siphoning moisture from the air, surviving in conditions that would kill a rose in an hour. I was misting my Phalaenopsis, a rare violet hybrid I had cultivated for 6 years, watching a single bead of water traverse the waxy surface of a leaf. You have to watch the roots. That is the rule of botany, and it is the rule of business. If the leaves are yellowing, the rot has already eaten the foundation. You cannot fix a dying plant by painting the petals. You have to dig. I am 71 years old. To my neighbours, I am Bill, the retired actuary who walks with a slight limp and spends too much time doing Sudoku puzzles on the porch. To my granddaughter, Maya, I am a sweet, slightly boring old man who doesn't understand how Venmo works. She loves me, but she pities me. She thinks my world is small. She doesn't know that the world she lives in, the world of high-frequency trading, offshore shell companies, and triple-blind trusts, is a world I helped architect and then spent 20 years dismantling for the Securities and Exchange Commission. The silence of my sunroom, usually broken only by the hiss of the mister, was shattered by the sound of the front door slamming. It wasn't just a slam, it was a detonation. The vibration rattled the teacups on the side table. "Grandpa!" Maya stormed into the room. She looked like a car crash in a $3,000 suit. Her hair, usually pulled back in a severe, intimidating bun, was fraying. Her mascara was smeared. She wasn't just upset. She was terrified. The specific terror of a young predator who has just realized she is actually prey. She threw her briefcase onto my ottoman. It slid off and hit the floor, spilling a cascade of documents across the Persian rug. "It's over," she choked out, pacing the small room like a caged tiger. "It's all over. My career, the firm, everything." I set the mister down on the potting bench. I wiped my hands on the rag. "Maya," I said, keeping my voice low, regulated. "Breathe. What is over?" "The Omnicorp merger," she cried, grabbing her hair. $40 billion, Grandpa. The biggest logistics deal of the decade. We were supposed to close at noon. The wire transfer. The escrow is empty. It's gone. The money is gone." I watched her. I didn't gasp. I didn't panic. I analysed. Gone is a relative term in finance, Maya. Money doesn't disappear. It moves. Where did it move to? "It didn't move!" she screamed, tears finally spilling over. "That's the point. Omnicorp provided the proof of funds yesterday. The bank confirmed it. But today, when we went to execute the release, the account didn't exist. The SWIFT code bounced. My senior partners are blaming me. They're saying I didn't do the due diligence. They're talking about disbarment. They're talking about federal charges for wire fraud." She slumped onto the wicker sofa, burying her face in her hands. "I'm going to prison, Grandpa. For a deal I didn't even structure. I just managed the closing." "Would you like some tea?" I asked. "I have chamomile drying on the rack." She looked up at me, her eyes flashing with a mix of anger and disbelief. "Tea? Grandpa, are you listening to me? I'm talking about $40 billion of missing liquidity. I'm talking about the SEC raiding my office. You don't understand this. This isn't balancing a checkbook or calculating life insurance premiums. This is complex structured finance. It's international banking law." "I see," I said. I didn't argue. I never argue with people who are drowning. They just thrash harder. I walked over to the mess on the floor. I knelt down. My knees cracked, a reminder of the years, not the capability. I began to gather the papers, confidential memos, asset valuations, risk assessments, and there, lying on top of a stack of glossy charts, was a single sheet of heavy, cream-coloured bond paper. Banque Privée de Zurich, proof of funds authorization. It looked impressive. It had the gold foil seal. It had the wet signatures of 2 executive officers. It had the terrifyingly large number, $40 billion. Most people look at the number. They get blinded by the zeros. They see the wealth and they stop thinking. I never look at the number. The number is the distraction. I looked at the metadata. I looked at the header. I looked at the footer. I looked at the timestamp. 9:42 CET. Maya was on her phone again, pacing. Yes, Richard. I'm trying to reach the correspondent bank. They aren't picking up. No, I don't know why the routing number is flagged. I picked up the paper. I stood up and walked to the window, holding the document up to the natural light. The watermark was correct. The paperweight was correct. But something was wrong. It was an itch at the base of my skull. A dissonance. I took my reading glasses from my breast pocket and slid them onto my nose. I focused on the string of characters at the bottom left, the Swift code BPZUCHZZ80A. I traced the line with my thumb. Maya, I said. She ignored me. Richard, stop yelling at me. I did verify the counterparty. Maya, I said again, louder. Not a shout, but a command. The voice I used to use when I walked into a boardroom to tell a CEO his company was insolvent. She stopped. She lowered the phone. What? Grandpa, please, I'm trying to save my life here. Who gave you this? I asked, tapping the paper. The CFO of Omnicorp, she said, exasperated. Mr. Vane, he handed it to me personally yesterday. It's a standard MT-103 confirmation. It is not standard, I said. Look at the branch code. The last 3 digits. 80A. So? That's the Zurich main branch suffix. Everyone knows that. It was, I corrected. Until September of 2019. Maya froze. What are you talking about? Banque Privée de Zurich underwent a restructuring in 2019 after the laundering scandal, I said, the information flowing from my memory like a retrieved file. They consolidated their commercial lending division. Branch 80A was shuttered. The building is now a luxury watch showroom. All commercial wires from that entity are now routed through branch 001 or 09B. Maya stared at me. The phone slipped slightly in her hand. How could you possibly know that? Maybe they reopened it. They didn't, I said, because the routing protocol forbids it. Once a Swift suffix is burned, it is retired for 10 years to prevent exactly this kind of ghost transaction. I looked closer at the document. I squinted at the typeface of the transaction ID. And the font, I murmured. The font? Maya stepped closer, looking at the paper as if it were a bomb. It looks like standard Arial. It's Helvetica Neue, I said. Look at the tail on the lowercase a. It curves up. Swiss banking standards require standard Helvetica or Frutica for all official interbank communiques. It is a legacy requirement from the telex days to ensure OCR readability. I looked up at her. This document wasn't generated by a bank mainframe in Zurich, Maya. It was generated by a high-end laser printer in New York. The kerning is too perfect. Mainframes have fixed width spacing for numbers. This is proportional. Maya's mouth opened, but no sound came out. She looked from the paper to me, and for the first time she didn't see the grandfather who watered plants. She saw someone else. She saw the eyes that had stared down the wolves of Wall Street before she was even born. "Grandpa," she whispered. "Who are you? How do you know about swift routing protocols and font kerning?" I took off my glasses. I folded them deliberately. "Because I wrote the compliance protocols for swift transfers in 1985, I said. "I sat in a room in Brussels for 6 months and defined what a valid wire transfer looks like so that people like Mr. Vane couldn't invent money out of thin air." The silence in the room was absolute. The hiss of the orchid mister seemed deafening. "You," Maya stammered. "You were an actuary. You calculated risk." "I calculated fraud," I said. "And I was very, very expensive." I looked at the document one last time, then placed it gently on the potting bench, next to the pruning shears. "This is a forgery, Maya. A good one. But a forgery. Omnicorp didn't lose the wire. They never had the money. They are leveraging your firm's reputation to float a position they can't cover. It's a circular kiting scheme. They are waiting for you to panic and front the liquidity to save the deal." Maya looked at her phone. "Richard is on the other line. He wants to bridge the gap from the firm's reserve. He says we have to close." "Tell Richard to sit on his hands," I said. "If he moves a dime, he's an accessory to a federal crime." I walked to the coat rack. I took down my trench coat. It was old, Burberry, well worn, but immaculate. I put it on. I buttoned it. I felt the weight of the fabric, the armour of my past life settling onto my shoulders. "Grandpa, what are you doing?" Maya asked, her voice trembling. "Where is the closing meeting?" I asked. "At the office, Midtown. Mr. Vane is waiting there now. He says if we don't fund by 5 p.m, he's suing us for breach of contract." "Good," I said. "I'll want him there." I turned to her. "Get your car, Maya. We're going to your office." "You?" she asked. "But what are you going to do?" "I am going to audit him," I said, "and bring the due diligence files. All of them. Even the ones they told you were confidential. Even the ones in the sealed red envelopes." "Grandpa, those are privileged. I can't just—" "Maya," I cut her off. My voice was steel. "You are not a lawyer today. Today you are the driver. Do you want to go to prison, or do you want to learn how the world actually works?" She looked at me. She swallowed hard. She nodded. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay." She grabbed her keys. She grabbed the files. I opened the door to the sunroom. The bright, warm light hit my face. I checked my watch. 2 p.m. 3 hours, I muttered to myself. Plenty of time to dissect a lie. I walked out of the house, leaving the orchids behind. They would be fine. They knew how to survive. It was the humans who needed help. The elevator ride to the 42nd floor of the Sterling and Hart building was a study in atmospheric pressure. Not the barometric kind, but the crushing weight of impending ruin. Maya was vibrating. I could hear the shallow intake of her breath, the rustle of the silk lining in her jacket. She was 29, brilliant and terrified. I stood perfectly still, watching the floor numbers climb. 38, 39, 40. I adjusted the cuffs of my trench coat. It was out of place here, amidst the Italian wool and bespoke tailoring of Midtown Manhattan. That was the point. In a room full of peacocks, the man in the beige raincoat is the only one who didn't come to be seen. He came to watch. "Grandpa," Maya whispered as the doors pinged at the 41st floor. Mr. Vane has 3 lawyers with him. They're sharks. If you are wrong about the forgery." "I am never wrong about the numbers, Maya," I said, stepping out as the doors opened. "People lie. Ledgers don't." We walked down the glass-walled corridor. I saw the heads turn, the paralegals, the associates. They saw the senior partner, Maya, looking pale, trailing an old man who looked like he had wandered in from a bus stop. They whispered, "Let them. Distraction is the first tool of the Auditor." We reached the main conference room, the war room. The door was heavy, frosted glass. Maya hesitated. I didn't. I pushed it open. The air inside smelled of stale coffee and aggressive cologne. At the head of the mahogany table sat Julian Vane, the CEO of Omnicorp. He was younger than I expected, 40s, tanned, with the kind of teeth that cost as much as a luxury sedan. Flanking him were 3 men in dark suits, their laptops open, their faces set in grim expressions of practiced intimidation. On the other side sat Richard, Maya's boss, looking like he was about to have a stroke. "Maya!" Richard barked, standing up. "Where the hell have you been? Vane is threatening to pull the deal. We need the wire confirmation now." Vane spun his chair around. He looked at Maya, then his eyes slid to me. He scanned the trench coat, the scuffed shoes, the thick glasses. He smirked. It was a predator's smirk, dismissing a non-threat. "Who is this?" Vane asked, his voice smooth, dripping with condescension. "Your chauffeur? Did you bring your grandfather to hold your hand while you bankrupt your firm?" The lawyers chuckled. It was a synchronized, ugly sound. I didn't speak. I walked past Maya. I walked past Richard. I walked to the head of the table, opposite Vane. There was an empty chair there, reserved for the managing partner. I pulled it out. The legs screeched against the marble floor, a harsh, violent sound that silenced the room. I sat down. I took off my glasses and placed them on the table. I unbuttoned my coat. "I am not her chauffeur," I said. My voice was soft, barely above a whisper. In a room designed for shouting, whispering is an act of aggression. "I am the man who is going to explain why your balance sheet is a fiction." Vane's smile faltered, just for a second. "Excuse me? Richard, get this geriatric trespasser out of here." "Sit down, Richard," I said, without looking at him. Richard, to his credit and confusion, sat. I reached into Maya's briefcase, which she had placed on the table. I pulled out the files, the due diligence stack, the confidential financials. I spread them out, not in a pile, but in a grid, a matrix of data. "I have been reading your shipping manifests, Mr. Vane," I said, picking up a spreadsheet. Omnicorp claims to move 40 million TEUs, 20-foot equivalent units, of cargo annually. Your revenue model is based on volume. "We are the market leader," Vane snapped. "This is public knowledge." "It is public assertion," I corrected. "I cross-referenced your port of entry receipts from Rotterdam and Singapore with your fuel surcharge invoices." I slid 2 papers across the table. They collided with Vane's coffee cup with a soft click. "You are claiming revenue for 40 million containers," I said. "But you're only paying fuel surcharges for 20 million. "We have efficient ships," Vane scoffed. "We hedge our fuel costs." "You cannot hedge physics," I said. "Ships burn oil. Unless your fleet is powered by magic, you are moving empty containers. You are shipping air, Mr. Vane. You are moving empty boxes from Hamburg to Newark, invoicing yourself for the transport, and booking it as revenue to inflate your stock price before the merger. The lawyers shifted in their seats. One of them started typing furiously. "This is absurd," Vane said, his face reddening. "This is circular logic. We have subsidiaries." "Circular logic," I repeated. An interesting choice of words. Let's talk about circles. Let's talk about circular trading. I picked up another document. A tax filing from a subsidiary called North Atlantic Logistics. You move money from Omnicorp to North Atlantic. I traced the path in the air with my finger. North Atlantic pays a consulting fee to Red Star Shipping in Hong Kong. Red Star pays a licensing fee back to Omnicorp. The money moves in a circle. It looks like 3 transactions. It looks like growth. But it is the same $10 million, spinning around and around like a hamster in a wheel. "That is standard intercompany accounting," Vane shouted, slamming his hand on the table. "You don't know what you're talking about. Who are you?" "I am the person who noticed that Red Star Shipping and North Atlantic Logistics share the same registered agent address," I said. "A P.O. box in Delaware." Vane stood up. "I am not staying for this. Richard, the deal is off. We are suing. Come on, gentlemen." He signalled to his lawyers. They began to pack up. "Sit down, Julian," I said. I didn't shout it. I said it with the weight of a judge passing a death sentence. "I haven't asked you about Panama yet." Vane froze. He was halfway out of his chair. He stopped as if he had been shot. "Panama?" he whispered. "Alecto Holdings," I said. The name hung in the air like smoke. "While Maya was parking the car," I continued, "I made a phone call to an old contact at the Panamanian Public Registry. It's amazing what you can find when you know the specific naming convention a fraudster uses for his shell companies. You like Greek mythology, don't you, Julian? Omni, Alecto, one of the Furies." I pulled a single sheet of paper from my pocket. It wasn't a document from the file. It was a printout from the hotel business centre where I'd stopped on the way here. "Alecto Holdings is the majority shareholder of Red Star Shipping," I read. "And the sole signatory for Alecto Holdings is not a corporate officer. It is not a board member." I looked up at him. I put my glasses back on. "It is you, Julian. Your personal signature. I have the incorporation papers right here." Vane sank back into his chair. He looked at the paper in my hand. He looked at his lawyers, who were now inching away from him, realizing they were sitting in the blast radius of a felony. You can't prove that is my signature," Vane stammered. That's a forgery." "Like the Bank of Zurich wire transfer?" I asked. I reached for a napkin from the centre of the table, a simple white cocktail napkin. I took a fountain pen from my pocket, a Mont Blanc I had bought in 1982 to sign the settlement agreement for the dismantling of the Bell system. I drew a circle. I wrote Omni at the top, North Atlantic at the right, Red Star at the bottom, Alecto in the centre. I drew arrows connecting them. I slid the napkin across the mahogany. It fluttered and landed in front of him. "This is your company, Julian," I said. "It is not a logistics firm. It is a Ponzi scheme built on shipping containers full of sea air." Vane stared at the napkin. The simplicity of it destroyed him. He looked up at me, really looked at me this time. He saw the grey eyes. He saw the patience. He saw the predator that eats the orchids. His face went pale. A flicker of recognition sparked in his eyes. "The diagram," he whispered. "The napkin. My father. He told me about a man who audited his firm in the 80s. He said the man didn't use a computer. He used a napkin and a pen. He called him the Auditor. Your father was a sloppy accountant, Julian, I said quietly. I see he taught you everything he knew. The room was silent. Richard's mouth was hanging open. Maya was staring at me as if I had just pulled a sword from a stone. Here's the deal, I said, leaning back. You have two choices. Choice A. You walk out of this room. You withdraw the merger offer. You resign as CEO of Omnicorp, citing health reasons. You dissolve Electo Holdings. And choice B? Vane asked, his voice trembling. Choice B, I said, checking my watch. I called the Department of Justice. I have a friend there. We used to hunt together. I explained to him why your assets are double-pledged. I give him the napkin. You go to federal prison for 20 years. And I take your lawyers with you for aiding and abetting. I looked at the lawyers. Unless, of course, you gentlemen were unaware of the Panama connection. We didn't know, the lead lawyer shouted immediately, throwing Vane under the bus with impressive speed. We were relying on client representations. We resign as counsel effective immediately. They stood up and walked out. They didn't look back. Vane was alone. The pen, Julian, I said, pointing to the Mont Blanc I had left on the table. Use it. Write the resignation on the notepad. Now. Vane picked up the pen. His hand was shaking. He wrote. He tore the page off. He slid it to me. He stood up. He looked small. The arrogance was gone, stripped away by the truth. Who are you? He whispered. Really? I am a retired actuary, I said, capping my pen. I like Sudoku. Now get out. Vane fled. He didn't run, but he walked fast, disappearing through the glass doors like a ghost exorcised from the building. I sat there for a moment. The silence was heavy. Grandpa, Maya breathed. She walked over to me. She touched my shoulder as if checking to see if I was real. You just dismantled a $40 billion fraud. In an hour. With a napkin. It wasn't $40 billion, Maya, I said, standing up and buttoning my coat. That is the trick. That is what you missed. I looked at Richard, who was still paralysed in his chair. It was zero, I said. It is always zero. The money was never there. The ships were empty. The assets were paper. When you strip away the lies, the value of a fraud is always zero. You were negotiating over nothing. I picked up the forged bank document from part 1 and ripped it in half. Never negotiate with zero, Maya. It has infinite leverage because it has nothing to lose. I walked toward the door. Maya followed me, grabbing her briefcase. Where are you going? She asked. We have to... I don't know, call the board. We have to celebrate. You saved the firm. I pressed the button for the elevator. I am going home, I said. I checked my watch. It is 3:45 p.m. So my orchids need misting at 4 p.m, I said as the elevator doors opened. They are sensitive to humidity. If I am late, the leaves will brown. I stepped into the elevator. I turned to face her. She stood in the hallway, surrounded by the glass and steel of her high-powered world, looking at her grandfather in his beige trench coat. Precision, Maya, I said, as the doors began to slide shut. In law, in finance, and in gardening. Never forget precision. The doors closed. I was alone again. I leaned against the wall of the elevator and let out a long, slow breath. My hands were shaking, just a little. The adrenaline was fading. I was 71 years old. I was tired. But the ledger was balanced, and that was enough.